Okay, so with Bounty Hunter coming out here pretty soon, I wanted to make an Evolution Combat PvP guide. Now, this first guide here will be more geared towards those who want to use range, because I really range is the main style that I use. I never use melee, and hardly, I'm talking maybe 1 out of 50 times I PK, I use mage. Really, range, in my opinion, is the best. Now, this is my opinion, is the best style. Now, what this guide is meant to do is to help those of you guys who are PVMers, who only boss, do Slayer, that type of stuff, or those of you who are legacy PKers and want to get into EoC Pking. Now, I'm not the best PKer. I'm not probably not the most qualified to be giving advice in some people's opinions, but I'm fairly decent. I can hold my own against most people, and I know my type of PKing that I do is extremely easy for those of you who are new to PKing. I don't really use too many weird combos. Really, I only mainly use one type of combo. So if you guys are new and want to get into PKing, this is the guide for you. Now, all that being said, if you guys do want a mage and a melee guide, then I can make those. I'll just have to get input from different clan members and different people that I know in the PvP community. But it will take a little bit longer and it will not be as in-depth as this guide will hopefully be. So without further ado, let's get into the guide. Okay, so first let's kind of talk about what is PvP in the Evolution Combat system. Now, if I had to describe it in the simplest of terms, I'd say cause and effect. You're causing your opponent to react to you, and you're in turn reacting to your opponent. It's kind of like a dance. Now, that's really one of the main reasons I love PvP, and hopefully why you guys grow to love it also. PVM is fine, Slayer's fine, but really, you're fighting a program. Something with set rules. It's gonna have a set reaction. When you're fighting another player, you're fighting a real live human being who you don't know what he's gonna do. He's thinking for himself, and I think that's the main reason why I love PvP so much, is because there's a satisfaction in knowing that you beat another person. Now, I'm a pretty competitive person, and hopefully those of you who want to learn how to PvP and PK, hopefully you guys are competitive and you bring that competitive nature into PvP. Now, I don't mean shit talking, I don't mean harassing other players. I mean bringing that sense of competition, wholesome competition, to the community. That's what PvP has always been about. Now, how do you win a PvP fight? Now, personally, when I start fighting another player who's also fighting me, and I'm not talking about PJing. In my personal opinion, PJing, player jumping, is anyone who's not actively going and trying to kill another player. So you're killing the Chaos Elemental. A pker attacks you. That's PJing, player jumping, in my opinion. You're not fighting him back. Really, you're just trying to run away. That's not PvP. What I mean by PKing is one player who goes out and says, I want to kill another player. Two of those players meet up and they try to kill each other. When you get into those types of fights, your goal should be to outsmart your opponent. If you're able to outsmart your opponent, 9 times out of 10, you will kill them. And that's what I try to do. Manipulate them and outsmart them. What I mean when I say you want to try to manipulate your opponent is you want to maneuver them and kind of control the fight. So I'll give you an example here. For those of you who enjoy bossing, stuff like that, imagine an infernal demon. Shit, I'm sorry, not, you guys can see how much I PVM. I'm not an infernal demon, a tormented demon. They prey based on the style that you're attacking. When you change to a new style, they change to a new prayer. You're manipulating them into switching that style prayer. For those of you who PK, say in Legacy, say your opponent has Vengeance and you want to try to spec them. Say your spec weapon, your special attack weapon is the Armadale God Sword. A tactic you can do to kind of manipulate them is, say, get them about 3/4 of the way down their HP, maybe halfway, and simply just wield your Armadale God Sword. Odds are they'll Vengeance in order to try to get you to hit their Vengeance. What you do in turn after they Venge is just wield your normal main weapons, say an Abyssal Whip, and just hit them to knock off their Vengeance. You manipulated them into using that Vengeance, and you kind of guided them into thinking that you were going to spec them. You outsmarted them, and that in turn gave you an advantage. That's really, when it boils it all down in PvP, that's going to give you the greatest advantage, is outsmarting your opponent. Now, I'll go through a few different ways you can do that in these videos. Really, this first video, I just wanted to cover really what PvP is about. I'll go into more how to outsmart your opponent when I talk about the abilities and in what certain situations each ability is useful. So now, finished with talking about PvP and its basics, let's talk about the triangle. Now, majority of you guys will know what I mean by triangle, but for those of you who don't know, there are 3 basic combat styles in RuneScape. There's melee, magic, and range. Now, Jagex buffed the triangle, the combat triangle is what it's called, pretty significantly. Now, if you don't know exactly how the triangle works, think of, if you've ever played Pokemon, think of Pokemon. Think of the 3 starter Pokemon. Each one has a weakness and a strength against the other one. Now, that's the same way in RuneScape. You've got melee, which is strong against range, and weak against magic. You've got range, which is strong against magic and weak against melee. And finally, you've got magic that is strong against melee, but weak against range. Now, I also have a few kind of inputs on the 3 different styles and really how it kind of comes into effect in PvP. Now, let's first talk about melee. I don't really use it too much, I'd never use it in PvP. I sometimes use it for PVM when I feel like relaxing. But melee, it does some pretty significant amount of damage in PvP. But its defense, it's average. It's not amazing, but once again, it's pretty good. But the greatest downfall of melee, and really the reason I don't use it, is because of its range. Now, what I mean by that is melee, you need to be in contact with your opponent. Now, why is that an issue in PvP? Basically, your opponent can outrun you. And so, say you're using an ability and it takes a little bit of time to activate. Say it's like a 4-hit ability. I believe Assault, I think, is one. They can run away from you. Say you're about halfway through that ability. They can run from you, and as soon as they get away from you and you're out of contact with them, your ability stops. You can't hit them anymore. Now, if they're using, say you're using a Noxious Scythe, that has a little bit better range than Drygore. So you're going to be able to hit them a little bit longer, but once they hit that distance that your weapon isn't able to hit them anymore, you're going to stop hitting them. Now, there are different abilities that you can use in order to kind of counter that and counter that distance problem. But if you guys are first coming into PvP, you're not going to really know how to do that. So once again, I will kind of go over that distance issue in PvP when we get into different abilities and how the abilities work. Okay, next let's talk about magic. Now, in my personal opinion, magic is really the highest damage output for PvP that there is out of all the styles, solely because you have spells such as vulnerability and weaken. It gives you a huge advantage. So when we're talking about magic, we're talking about high damage output like melee, but its downfall isn't its range. Its downfall is its defense. Magic really doesn't have that great of defense. Now, there are little twists to that. Say you're in raid gear, tank gear, or using a shield. That's going to change. But just using your basic magic armor, Gano, Virtus, you're not going to have amazing defense. So that's really its main downfall. Its range is good. You've got one-tick abilities. It's a solid style, but just because of its low defense, I don't particularly like it too much. I will use it, but my favorite style is range. Now, why is that? With range, you're not really looking at huge damage output too much. You do have the potential to use some pretty good abilities, and you will get that high damage, but it's mainly its average damage. But it's also pretty much average defense. It's kind of the middle ground there in between melee and mage. Now, its range, it's also got range for its distance, which means you don't have to be in contact with your opponent. It also means you can outrun other people who are using melee and sometimes magic. What is the downfall, though? Now, I'll cover this more in the video that I go over abilities, but range's main downfall is it doesn't have a one-tick prayer knock. Now, what I mean about that is melee has smash and magic has dragon breath. And what those two abilities do is they take off protection prayers. Not protect one item, don't worry, it doesn't do that. That would be way overpowered. What it does is it takes off the protection from melee, protection from mage, and protection from ranged prayers. Now, range has snipe. It'll take off those prayers also, but it takes about 3 seconds for your ability to hit your opponent. If any of you guys have used the ability before, you know what I mean when I say that. Now, in a PvP situation, that is extremely unhelpful, to say the least, because your opponent, like all styles, range has a certain distance. It's longer than melee, but there is that distance where if your opponent runs past that, you can't attack them anymore. So your opponent can outrun your snipe. But with melee and mage, you have a 1 tick. So basically, you use your ability, it hits them immediately. They can't outrun it. So I'll go over that more in the video where I talk about abilities. Now I want to talk about gear. In current RS, current RuneScape Evolution Combat System, in PvP, gear doesn't really matter, but it matters. Now, extremely contradicting, I know, but here, let me explain what I mean. Really, EoC PvP, kind of talking about earlier, what I was going over, it comes down to your skill and whether or not you outsmart your opponent. If you take a bad pker, put him in top tier gear, say you've got a bad pker in full Serenic armor. This actually happened to me. Bad pker, full Serenic armor, good pker, royal crossbow, royal armor. I was able to kill that person in Serenic armor and Noxious longbow pretty darn easily. The video is actually up on my channel. I think it's titled "Those Sneaky Little Yaks." I was in Red Portal. But if you have someone whose skill level is far below that of another, gear, that tends to be when gear doesn't matter. When gear starts to matter is when you have people of similar skill sets. So, say I went up against a person with similar gear setup as, well, skill level as me. Say I was in royal armor and he was in Serenic. Odds are we're not really going to be able to KO each other. Sorry. We're not going to be able to KO each other. But odds are he's going to make me either run or teleport because he'll be doing more damage than I am. So I'm going to run out of food faster. That's what I mean when I say in those situations when you have similar skill sets, that's when gear tends to start to matter. But really, if there's one takeaway from this video, just consider this the end of the video. The takeaway that, and the lesson that I want you guys to learn from this video is PvP in Evolution Combat basically comes down to whether or not you're able to set up your combo and outsmart your opponent. If you're able to do that, then odds are you're going to be a pretty darn good pker. So thanks for watching. Next video, I'll cover abilities and a little bit on how to outsmart your opponent. Thanks for watching.